Today I examined an 82-year-old patient and performed the Hallpike maneuver on the right side. After positioning the patient, I observed an abrupt upbeating nystagmus with a torsional component toward the right, which is consistent with a right posterior canal BPPV. The nystagmus was quite robust initially, but gradually subsided. I then waited for it to stop completely before moving the patient into the Epley maneuver, as the initial positioning is the same. Alright, the patient is now lying in the first position of the Epley maneuver on the right side. I've asked his wife to hold his head firmly to ensure he stays stable and doesn't move from that position. Alright, now I move the patient's head into the second position of the Epley maneuver. I quickly rotate his head about 90 degrees to the left side, which is the second position. His wife is holding his head steady and will maintain this position for approximately 2 minutes. Next, I move into the third position of the Epley maneuver. The patient is turned onto his left side and his head is rotated about 90 degrees, so that is angled approximately 45 degrees to the floor. We keep the patient in this position for another 2 minutes. Finally, we return the patient to an upright sitting position. As we elevate his head, it remains turned, and once he is seated, we then straighten his head back to its normal position. Alright, after about 15 to 20 minutes, I perform a controlled Hallpike maneuver on the right side. The patient is positioned into the Hallpike position and I observe closely the eyes. At first, it seems that everything is fine and no nystagmus appears immediately. But let's continue to observe further. After some time, we observe the typical upbeating nystagmus with a torsional component, once again indicating that the issue hasn't been fully resolved and that the otoconia remain in the right posterior canal. This suggests that the initial Epley maneuver was not successful and we will need to repeat it. In this situation, I decided to repeat the Epley maneuver once more. Additionally, I asked the patient's wife to gently tap on his mastoid process to help the otoconia dislodge more effectively and become more susceptible to being flushed out of a posterior canal. The patient's wife began to regularly tap on the patient's right mastoid process, maintaining this gentle tapping throughout the entire first position of the Epley maneuver. After 2 minutes, I then turned the patient into the second position of the Epley maneuver, rotating his head about 90 degrees to the left. In this second position, I continued to recommend that his wife gently tap on his mastoid process to help the otoconia move forward through the canal. Next, I turned the patient into the third position of the Epley maneuver, rotating him onto his left side. In this position, his head is turned about 90 degrees, so that his nose is angled approximately 45 degrees to the floor. Throughout this position, the patient's wife continues to gently tap on his mastoid process. Once we complete the Epley maneuver, I bring the patient back to an upright sitting position and remove the goggles. After a break of about 15 to 20 minutes, I performed a follow-up Hallpike maneuver on the right side to recheck the situation. Unfortunately, the upbeating nystagmus with a slight torsional component to the right still appeared, indicating that the issue hadn't been resolved. After both the standard and the tapping-assisted Epley maneuvers, at this point I decided to explore a more robust approach and opted to perform the Bascule maneuver. The Bascule maneuver involves pivoting the patient dynamically from one side to the other and then back again. It's similar to the Semont maneuver and must be performed with a dynamic and abrupt motion. Specifically, it needs to be done in the LARP plane, left anterior and right posterior canal, since the right posterior canal is affected in the patient. Here you can see how I pivot the patient from one side to the other and back again. But it's important to keep in mind that the patient's head remains aligned with the LARP plane. I must maintain the precise orientation because if the head is not kept in the correct LARP plane, the Bascule maneuver won't be effective for the patient. I pivot the patient back and forth at least 5 or 6 times, and in each position the patient remains for about 20 to 30 seconds. This illustrates just how dynamic and abrupt the maneuver needs to be. Alright, now let's recheck the situation. After performing a series of Bascule maneuvers, I conduct the Hallpike maneuver again on the right side. As we observe the patient's eye, we see that nothing happens. No nystagmus appears, indicating that the patient is indeed cured. It's a full success. However, it's important to note how challenging this case was. Initially, it appeared to be a typical BPPV of the right posterior canal. The standard Epley maneuver didn't work, and even the Epley maneuver with tapping didn't resolve the issue. Ultimately, it was the Bascule maneuver that made the difference, and in the end, the patient was permanently cured and no longer experienced vertigo.